Was Robin Hood a real man who fought against injustice, or just a legend created to inspire hope? For centuries, historians and storytellers have debated the truth behind England's most mysterious outlaw. Tonight, we'll uncover the puzzle. Who was Robin Hood really, and did he even exist? From ballads sung in medieval taverns to Hollywood's heroic archer, Robin Hood has become one of the most famous outlaws in history. But hidden beneath the tales of stealing from the rich to give to the poor lies a deep mystery. Was Robin Hood a single man, a combination of many rebels, or a mythical figure born from the struggles of the English people? Join us as we dive into the truth behind Robin Hood, England's greatest mystery outlaw. For centuries, the name Robin Hood has echoed through the halls of history, whispered in ballads, and shouted in taverns as the anthem of the common people. But when did this story begin? To answer that, we must travel back to medieval England, a time when life for the poor was a daily struggle, and power was tightly clenched in the hands of kings, nobles, and corrupt officials. It was in this environment, thick with unrest and injustice, that the figure of Robin Hood first began to take shape, not in stone records or official documents, but in the songs and stories of ordinary people. The earliest references to Robin Hood emerged in the late 14th century, during a period when England was torn apart by poverty, political conflict, and rebellion. This was the age of serfs, peasants, and farmers who labored endlessly, paying heavy taxes to landlords while famine and plague threatened their survival. In a world where few dared to question authority, the stories of an outlaw who defied corrupt sheriffs and stood against greedy lords captured the imagination like wildfire. The first real mention of Robin Hood can be traced to William Langland's poem Piers Plowman, written in the 1370s, where a passing reference is made to Rhymes of Robin Hood. This is important because it shows that by this time, the legend was already well known enough to be casually referenced in literature, suggesting the stories had been circulating orally long before they were written down. The ballads that followed painted a vivid picture of Robin Hood. Unlike the nobleman-turned-outlaw we often see in movies, the earliest Robin Hood was not a rich lord who fell from grace, but rather a yeoman, someone in the middle class of medieval society, neither peasant nor noble. This is crucial because it meant Robin Hood represented a figure closer to the ordinary people who told his story. He wasn't born with privilege, and he wasn't stripped of it either. He was one of them, living in the forests, evading corrupt sheriffs, and redistributing wealth in a way that symbolized justice for the oppressed. These songs weren't polished literary works. They were raw, energetic tales performed by minstrels and sung in marketplaces, passed from ear to ear by villagers who found hope in the idea of a man brave enough to resist authority. Stories like Robin Hood and the Monk and Robin Hood and the Potter, some of the earliest surviving ballads, highlight his cleverness, his defiance, and his sense of justice. They also show us that Robin Hood was not alone. Even from the start, characters like Little John and Much the Miller's son appeared alongside him, forming the beginnings of what would later be celebrated as his band of merry men. But why did these stories emerge during this time? The answer lies in the tensions of medieval England. The 14th century was marked by the Black Death, which wiped out nearly half of Europe's population. In the aftermath, labor shortages gave peasants more bargaining power, but nobles and landowners fought to suppress them, leading to uprisings like the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. It was a time when ordinary people were questioning the fairness of a system that demanded everything but gave little in return. Out of this turmoil, Robin Hood's legend became more than just entertainment. It was a voice of rebellion, a symbol of resistance to injustice. Sherwood Forest, Nottingham, and the Sheriff of Nottingham began to appear consistently in these tales. These weren't chosen at random. Forests during medieval times were not just woodlands. They were places under strict royal control, guarded fiercely by the king's laws. Hunting deer, cutting wood, or even foraging in these forests could bring harsh punishment. To the poor, these forests represented both opportunity and oppression, a place to hide, but also a reminder of their exclusion from the king's wealth. The outlaw who defied those laws, who hunted the king's deer and lived free in Sherwood, became a fantasy of empowerment for people who had no freedom at all. The church also played a role in shaping the legend. Many ballads painted Robin Hood as a devout man who respected the Virgin Mary, showing that even though he defied earthly authority, he was still righteous in the eyes of God. This made him not a blasphemous rebel, but a moral figure whose cause had divine approval. In a deeply religious society, this was essential for audiences to sympathize with him rather than condemn him. Over time, the stories evolved, spreading across England and reaching into Scotland. They shifted with the needs of the people who told them. In some tales, Robin was a rough outlaw who killed without hesitation. In others, he was softened into a noble hero who gave generously to the poor. Each version reflected the hopes and fears of the people who carried the story forward, adapting the outlaw to the struggles of their own time. By the end of the medieval period, Robin Hood had grown into more than a character in a ballad. He had become a cultural icon, a reflection of the people's longing for justice and fairness in a world dominated by corruption and greed. And yet, behind all these stories, one question remained unanswered. Was he real, or was he only ever a creation of folklore born out of hardship and hope? The question that has fascinated historians for centuries is this: if Robin Hood truly lived, who was he? The ballads and poems give us a picture of a daring outlaw in Sherwood Forest, but when we turn to the dusty records of medieval England, we begin to see names and fragments of lives that might have inspired the legendary figure. Somewhere between the myths and the chronicles of history lie the possible identities of England's greatest outlaw. One of the strongest theories suggests that Robin Hood may have been based on a real man named Robert Hood, sometimes recorded as Robin Hood across medieval legal documents. The name Robert Hood appears multiple times, often connected with outlaws, fugitives, and men accused of rebellion. In fact, the name itself might have been so closely associated with crime that it became a kind of generic term for lawbreakers. In Yorkshire records from the 13th century, for example, a man named Robert Hood is listed as an outlaw. His existence raises the possibility that the songs of Robin Hood were inspired by actual criminals who defied authority and lived outside the law. Another candidate linked to the legend is Robert of Locksley, sometimes written as Robert Fitz-Odo or Robert Fitz-Uth. According to tradition, this man may have been a dispossessed noble who turned to the forest after losing his lands. The connection here is important because later stories of Robin Hood began to portray him not as a common yeoman, but as the noble Earl of Huntingdon, a man of wealth and privilege who chose to side with the oppressed against corrupt rulers. This shift in identity may have been drawn from figures like Robert of Locksley, blending history with storytelling to create a hero with both noble roots and outlaw spirit. The medieval period was full of rebellion, and some believe Robin Hood may have been linked to rebels who fought directly against the crown. During the reign of King John in the early 13th century, unrest spread throughout the kingdom, culminating in the signing of the Magna Carta in 1215. Among the rebels were knights and minor lords who challenged the king's authority. Could Robin Hood have been one of these men, someone who defied royal power, lost everything, and took to the forest as a fugitive? The timing aligns because many of the earliest Robin Hood tales place him in conflict with corrupt sheriffs and lords, themes that mirror the real grievances of John's rebellious barons and their followers. Even more intriguing is the possibility that Robin Hood was not one man at all, but a blend of several different individuals whose stories merged over time. In medieval England, stories of outlaws were popular across many regions. Each county might have had its own local hero, someone who defied the sheriff or resisted oppressive taxes. Over centuries of retelling, these different stories may have fused into a single legendary outlaw Robin Hood who embodied the collective struggles of the people. Historical records also point us to Wakefield in Yorkshire, where the Wakefield court rolls mention a man named Robert Hood and his wife Matilda. Interestingly, some of the later ballads give Robin Hood's wife the name Marian, a detail that could have developed from Matilda. This connection between recorded names and the evolving legend provides tantalizing evidence that the stories were grounded, at least in part, in real people. Another figure often brought into the conversation is Fulk Fitzwarren, a nobleman turned rebel during the reign of King John. Fulk's life was full of drama. He was outlawed, fought against the king, and became a hero of his own romance tales. The parallels between Fulk Fitzwarren's life and the Robin Hood stories are striking. leading some historians to believe that Robin Hood may have been a folk adaptation of his exploits, reshaped to suit the common people. But there is another layer to consider: the role of names themselves. Robin was a common nickname for Robert, while Hood was not an unusual surname in medieval England. The frequent appearance of names like Robert Hood or Robin Hood in various counties may have helped spread the legend further, as different communities could claim our Robin Hood was the real one. This repetition of names across centuries added to the confusion, making it difficult to separate fact from folklore but ensuring that the legend endured. Historians have also debated whether Robin Hood could have been linked to specific moments of political turmoil. During the 1260s, when Simon de Montfort led a rebellion against King Henry III, England was filled with discontent. Many outlaws roamed the forest during these years, taking advantage of the instability. Some scholars suggest that the earliest tales of Robin Hood may have been influenced by stories of rebels from this turbulent period, remembered as champions of the people who fought tyranny. The search for Robin Hood's true identity has led to countless theories, but what becomes clear is that the legend was never tied to one single man. Instead, it drew from a pool of outlaws, rebels, and local heroes, reshaped by storytellers into a single figure who could embody the timeless struggle between justice and oppression. Whether Robert Hood of Wakefield, Robert of Locksley, or even a composite of many figures, the outlaw became a symbol larger than any real individual. And yet, even as historians sift through records and uncover forgotten names, the legend refuses to be confined to one face or one life. Robin Hood remains a mystery because he may have always been more than just a man. He was an idea, a reflection of hope, and a story that grew stronger with every retelling, no matter who first inspired it. If there is one place that has become inseparable from the legend of Robin Hood, it is Sherwood Forest. The very mention of his name calls to mind towering oak trees, hidden glades, and outlaws moving silently through the shadows, always one step ahead of the Sheriff of Nottingham. But how did this forest, an actual place in medieval England, become the heart of one of the world's most enduring legends? To answer that, we need to understand what Sherwood truly was in the time of Robin Hood. In the Middle Ages, Sherwood Forest was not simply a stretch of woodland. It was a royal forest, a carefully protected hunting ground belonging to the king. Forest law was strict, and it was not designed to protect trees. It was designed to protect game animals, particularly deer, which were reserved exclusively for the king and his nobles. For ordinary villagers living nearby, these rules were suffocating. A man could be punished harshly for cutting wood, snaring rabbits, or even gathering fallen branches. Hunting a deer was considered theft from the crown itself. To survive in such a landscape meant living under constant threat of punishment, and to break these laws was to become an outlaw. It is within this environment that the tales of Robin Hood take root. The outlaw who lived freely in Sherwood represented a dream of resistance against the king's harsh forest laws. The forest became more than just a backdrop, it became a symbol of freedom. Hidden beneath the green canopy, Robin and his men could move beyond the reach of sheriffs and lords, turning the king's own land into a place of refuge for the oppressed. For the people who told and retold these stories, Sherwood was not just a forest. It was a sanctuary, a place where justice could flourish away from the corruption of town and court. Sherwood's reputation was amplified by its proximity to Nottingham. Nottingham, a bustling medieval town, was the seat of authority for the Sheriff of Nottingham, the most infamous villain in the Robin Hood tales. The sheriff's role was not only to enforce the king's law, but also to collect taxes, often ruthlessly. To the poor, he embodied everything corrupt and unjust about the ruling class. By placing Robin Hood in Sherwood just beyond the sheriff's reach, the storytellers created a perfect stage for conflict. The outlaw in the forest and the sheriff in the town, two forces locked in an eternal struggle. The geography of Sherwood also lent itself naturally to myth-making. Covering more than 100,000 acres at its height, the forest stretched across much of Nottinghamshire, a vast and wild landscape full of hiding places, winding paths, and natural defenses. It was easy for people to imagine an outlaw band vanishing into its depths, striking quickly and then disappearing as if the forest itself had swallowed them. Tales describe Robin and his merry men dining beneath the branches of the great major oak, ambushing travelers along forest roads and redistributing wealth in ways that challenged the sheriff's authority. The forest provided the perfect canvas for these stories to thrive, blending real geography with legendary exploits. But Sherwood was not just a place of danger and rebellion, it was also a place of community. In the Tales, Robin Hood is never alone. He is surrounded by his loyal companions Little John, Will Scarlet, Friar Tuck, and others who share his life beneath the trees. Together they form a brotherhood of outlaws, bound not by blood, but by a shared commitment to justice. Sherwood becomes the stage where these bonds are tested and celebrated, a forest kingdom where the rules of ordinary society are rewritten. For audiences in medieval England, imagining such a world was a powerful escape from their own harsh realities. The significance of Sherwood Forest is also tied to the idea of the greenwood, a recurring theme in medieval literature. The greenwood represented both freedom and danger, a space outside the bounds of law and order where anything could happen. To live in the greenwood was to reject authority, but it was also to embrace a kind of wild justice. In Robin Hood's Tales, the greenwood is not a place of chaos but of balance where corrupt sheriffs and greedy nobles are punished, and the poor find relief. It became a kind of utopia in the collective imagination, an idealized vision of life beyond the reach of oppressive rulers. Even today, Sherwood Forest carries that mythical aura. Tourists travel from around the world to see the major oak, the ancient tree said to have sheltered Robin and his band. The landscape has become a physical link to the legend, a place where history and myth intertwine. But in medieval times, the forest was more than a landmark. It was a living, breathing character in the story. Without Sherwood, Robin Hood might have been just another outlaw in the records of history. With Sherwood, he became untouchable, larger than life, a symbol of the people's defiance. It is telling that in many of the oldest ballads, the forest is mentioned with reverence, as though it were a holy place. Robin Hood himself is often portrayed as a man of the forest, someone whose skills in hunting, archery, and survival make him uniquely suited to this environment. Sherwood is not just a hiding place. It is his kingdom, his stage, his sanctuary, and for those who first heard these stories sung in marketplaces and taverns, the image of an outlaw thriving in the very forest meant to oppress them must have been both thrilling and deeply comforting. The bond between Robin Hood and Sherwood Forest is one of legend's greatest strokes of genius. By rooting the outlaw's tale in a real place that audiences knew, storytellers grounded the myth in reality. Sherwood was not a faraway fantasy land, it was just beyond the town, just beyond the reach of the sheriff's men. It was a place they could picture, a place they might even walk through themselves. And that made Robin Hood not just a hero of stories, but a figure who could have been real, hiding among the trees, waiting for the next chance to strike against injustice. Throughout the centuries, Robin Hood has been remembered as a champion of justice, a man who stood against tyranny and fought for the poor. But when we peel back the layers of folklore and ballads, an unsettling question arises: was Robin Hood truly a noble hero, or was he simply an outlaw, a criminal who broke the laws of his time? The answer is far more complex than the stories would have us believe. In the earliest surviving ballads, Robin Hood is not portrayed as the noble, polished figure we see in modern films. Instead, he is a rough, often violent outlaw who lived outside the law, clashed with church officials, and killed without hesitation when cornered. One of the oldest stories, Robin Hood and the Monk, describes him mercilessly killing a man in order to escape capture. This is not the chivalrous protector of the weak that later storytellers celebrated. It is the portrait of a dangerous bandit who refused to bow to authority. For audiences in the Middle Ages, this darker version of Robin Hood reflected a reality they knew all too well. Outlaws were not fairy tale figures. They were men who lived by force, survival, and defiance. And yet, even in these early tales, Robin Hood is different from the common criminal. He does not steal indiscriminately. He takes from those he believes to be corrupt wealthy clergymen, arrogant officials, greedy nobles, and spares those he sees as innocent or poor. In many ballads, he shows great generosity, sharing his spoils with common folk or rewarding those who treat him fairly. This balance of ruthless outlaw and generous benefactor gave Robin Hood a unique place in the imagination of the people. He was feared, but he was also admired. He broke the law, but in doing so, he seemed to enforce a higher law of justice. The Sheriff of Nottingham, the ever-present antagonist in the Robin Hood stories, is crucial to this dynamic. The sheriff embodies authority, legal, political, and royal. By making the sheriff the enemy, the stories set up a conflict, not simply between outlaw and lawman, but between the oppressed and the oppressor. To the peasants of medieval England, who endured heavy taxation and brutal enforcement of forest laws, the sheriff was a symbol of injustice. Robin Hood's defiance of him transformed the outlaw into a hero, someone who dared to do what ordinary people could not. In this way, Robin Hood's legend bridged the gap between criminality and heroism, painting him as both breaker of laws and defender of the people. Over time, the legend softened and evolved, shaping Robin Hood into a figure more aligned with moral virtue. By the Renaissance, plays and stories began to portray him not as a rough yeoman, but as a dispossessed nobleman, the Earl of Huntingdon, who lost his lands through injustice and turned outlaw in the name of righteousness. This transformation was not accidental, it reflected the tastes of changing audiences. As the middle and upper classes embraced the stories, they wanted Robin Hood to be more than a common thief. They wanted a hero they could respect, someone with noble blood who fought for ideals of honor and justice. Thus, Robin Hood's identity shifted from bandit to knightly protector, aligning him with the chivalric ideals of the age. The idea of stealing from the rich to give to the poor, though not strongly present in the earliest ballads, became the defining moral code of Robin Hood in later centuries. It was a message that resonated deeply across generations, especially during times of inequality. Whether he was a yeoman with a bow or a nobleman stripped of his lands, Robin Hood came to embody the dream that justice could be won, not through kings or courts, but through the actions of one brave man who refused to bow. His legend became a voice for those who had none. Still, historians remain cautious. To them, Robin Hood, if he ever existed, was more likely closer to the rough outlaw of the early ballads than the noble protector of later tradition. Living outside the law in medieval England was brutal, dangerous, and often bloody. It required violence, theft, and cunning. The romantic version of Robin Hood, the man in green tights, rescuing peasants and defeating the sheriff with clever tricks, is a cultural creation shaped by centuries of storytelling. The real men who inspired him, if they existed, probably resembled hardened rebels or desperate fugitives more than polished heroes. And yet, it is precisely this duality that gives Robin Hood his enduring power. He is both outlaw and hero, sinner and saint, a man who embodies the contradictions of justice itself. Laws are written by those in power, but justice belongs to the people. By standing outside the law and yet championing fairness, Robin Hood blurs the lines between right and wrong. For medieval peasants, this ambiguity was not a flaw, it was the truth of their world. Survival often meant breaking rules, and morality was not always aligned with legality. Robin Hood was their mirror, reflecting their struggles, their anger, and their hope. The transformation of Robin Hood from feared outlaw to beloved hero shows how myths evolved to serve the needs of their audiences. To some, he was a criminal to be punished. To others, he was a savior, a protector of the weak. Over the centuries, the darker edges of his legend faded, replaced by the image of a gallant archer in Lincoln green, noble in purpose, clever in wit, and pure in heart. But behind that polished mask remains the shadow of the outlaw, the man who lived outside the law, who fought with bow and blade, who made the forest his home and defied the sheriff's power at every turn. The legend of Robin Hood has never remained fixed in time. Instead, it has shifted, stretched, and reshaped itself for every generation that has told his story. What began as gritty medieval ballads sung in smoky taverns became refined poetry, grand plays, and later Hollywood blockbusters. Each retelling stripped away or added new details, blurring the line between myth and reality. And so, as we trace the outlaw's footsteps through the centuries, we must ask, what parts of Robin Hood belong to history, and what parts belong to the imagination of those who needed him most? In the earliest surviving ballads, Robin Hood is raw, violent, and practical. He lives in the forest because the forest is the only refuge for outlaws. He kills not out of nobility, but out of necessity. He tricks wealthy churchmen, ambushes unsuspecting travelers, and demands payment from those who wander into his territory. These stories were not fairy tales. They were reflections of the harsh realities of medieval England, where laws served the powerful and survival often meant breaking them. To audiences of the 14th and 15th centuries, Robin Hood was not a polished hero in green tights. He was a man of the people's anger. Their frustrations turned into flesh and blood. But as the centuries passed, the story began to change. By the 16th century, Robin Hood was no longer merely an outlaw. He was being woven into the tapestry of England's national mythology. Writers began to connect him with noble birth, claiming he was the Earl of Huntingdon, a dispossessed lord who turned to the forest when stripped of his lands. This shift elevated Robin Hood's status, making him a figure who could appeal not only to peasants but to nobles and gentry as well. By giving him a title, they gave him respectability, and in doing so, they smoothed the rough edges of his story. The transformation continued with the rise of theater. Robin Hood became a favorite subject for May Day festivals, where villagers celebrated spring with plays and pageants. In these performances, he was often joined by Maid Marian, a character who had not appeared in the earliest ballads. Together, Robin and Marian came to symbolize not only rebellion but also romance, their partnership softening the outlaw's image and making his story suitable for celebration. No longer a dangerous fugitive, Robin Hood became a figure of joy, festivity, and moral triumph. As printing spread across Europe, the ballads of Robin Hood were gathered, edited, and distributed in cheap booklets. These chapbooks reached wider audiences than ever before, cementing his popularity. Yet, each retelling carried its own agenda. Some authors emphasized his loyalty to the church and his devotion to the Virgin Mary, presenting him as a pious hero. Others highlighted his generosity to the poor, sharpening the message of justice and redistribution. And still others focused on his conflict with authority, making him a symbol of resistance against tyranny. The result was not one Robin Hood, but many, each shaped by the needs of the time. By the Victorian era, the outlaw had been polished into a near-saintly figure. The Victorians, who adored tales of morality and virtue, presented Robin Hood as a gallant gentleman thief, noble in spirit, pure of heart, and unwavering in his fight for the oppressed. Illustrators portrayed him as a handsome archer in Lincoln Green, surrounded by loyal companions and adored by Maid Marian. This was a far cry from the rough and ready yeoman of the medieval ballads. Reality had been swallowed almost entirely by myth. And then came the 20th century, when Robin Hood leapt from the page to the silver screen. Hollywood embraced the outlaw with gusto, giving audiences iconic portrayals that cemented his image in popular culture. Errol Flynn's swashbuckling Robin Hood of the 1930s dazzled audiences with his charm, daring, and romance. Later adaptations brought new spins, some dark, some comedic, some realistic, and some fantastical. Each film and television show reinvented the character for its time, reflecting contemporary concerns about justice, authority, and rebellion. But through all these transformations, the question of reality lingers. Who was the real Robin Hood? Was he a yeoman from Yorkshire, a nobleman from Locksley, or a complete invention of the medieval imagination? Historians point to records of outlaws named Robert Hood or Robin Hood, but none can be firmly tied to the legend we know. What becomes clear is that the myth has long since overshadowed whatever reality there may have been. Robin Hood has become a cultural mirror, reflecting the values, fears, and hopes of the societies that told his story. And perhaps this is the secret of his endurance. Robin Hood is not fixed in the past, he is always reinvented. To medieval peasants, he was a symbol of resistance against cruel laws. To Renaissance playwrights, he was a noble outlaw who embodied chivalry. To Victorians, he was a moral hero, and to modern audiences, he is a cinematic icon whose bow and arrow still strike against injustice. The legend survives because it can bend to the needs of each generation, always relevant, always inspiring. But behind this ever-changing myth lies a tantalizing possibility that there was once a real man, or perhaps several, whose deeds sparked the first tales. The line between myth and reality is blurred beyond recognition, and perhaps it always will be. For Robin Hood is not just a character in a story. He is an idea, and ideas do not need precise beginnings to endure. For all the songs, ballads, plays, and films that have kept Robin Hood alive for more than 7 centuries, one question still looms above them all. Did he ever really exist? The Outlaw of Sherwood Forest remains one of the greatest puzzles in English history, a figure balanced on the edge of fact and folklore. Historians have searched court records, chronicles, and parish rolls, finding scattered traces of men with similar names, yet none that conclusively prove Robin Hood was ever flesh and blood. And so, the legend continues to hover in the space between history and imagination. What makes the mystery so compelling is the sheer persistence of the story. Very few medieval ballads have endured into modern times, and fewer still have shaped global culture the way Robin Hood has. His tale refuses to fade because it is not only about one man, it is about a set of values, a dream of justice, and the eternal struggle against tyranny. In every age, people have reimagined Robin Hood to fit their world, which is why historians struggle to untangle where the man ends and the myth begins. One of the most fascinating aspects of the mystery is how Robin Hood reflects the anxieties of the times in which he was told. In the 14th century, he symbolized rebellion against oppressive forest laws and sheriffs who bled the poor dry with taxes. In the Tudor era, he was reshaped into a nobleman who represented loyalty to the crown and chivalric ideals. In the Victorian age, he became a moral hero who embodied generosity and righteousness. And in the 20th century, he became a cinematic swashbuckler, charming audiences with daring sword fights and a sense of romantic adventure. Each version tells us less about who Robin Hood was and more about what people needed him to be. But even as the character has been reshaped, the mystery has never been solved. Records from medieval England list countless outlaws, rebels, and fugitives named Robert Hood, Robin Hood, or similar variations. Some were petty criminals, some rebels against local sheriffs, and others men driven into outlawry by poverty or injustice. Any one of them could have sparked the first tales, or perhaps all of them together fed into a single composite legend. Yet no historian can point to one man and say with certainty, this was Robin Hood. That uncertainty is part of the power of the story. Because Robin Hood is not tied to a single historical figure, he belongs to everyone. He is a symbol more than a person, an idea of resistance that anyone can claim. This universality has allowed him to endure across centuries, across cultures, and across oceans. Whether in medieval England, Renaissance courts, or modern movie theaters, Robin Hood continues to matter, because he represents a dream that never dies. The dream of justice against corruption, freedom against oppression, and fairness against greed. Even the places tied to his legend carry this sense of timelessness. Sherwood Forest still stands, a living monument to the tales that grew among its trees. The major oak, said to be Robin Hood's hiding place, continues to draw visitors from around the world, people who come not just to see a tree, but to step into the shadow of a legend. Nottingham Castle, once the stronghold of the Sheriff of Nottingham, now serves as a reminder of the battles between law and outlaw, ruler and rebel that define the stories. These places connect the myth to the land, keeping the mystery alive with every footstep taken through their soil. And yet, the more we search for the truth, the more elusive it becomes. Scholars have pored over manuscripts looking for traces of Robin Hood in medieval chronicles. Some point to entries in the Wakefield court rolls mentioning a Robert Hood and his wife Matilda. Others highlight the rebel Fulk Fitzwarren, whose life bore striking similarities to the legend. Still, others argue that the name Robin Hood was not a single person at all, but a title given to outlaws in general, a symbol of defiance rather than an individual. Each theory sheds light, but none settles the question. This uncertainty has not weakened the story, it has strengthened it. Because there is no definitive answer, every generation can imagine its own Robin Hood. For some, he is a nobleman betrayed by the powerful. For others, he is a yeoman who rose from the people. For still others, he is pure invention, a myth created to give voice to the voiceless. And perhaps that is why his story endures. Because it is less about solving the mystery of one man's life and more about carrying forward an idea that transcends time. Even today, Robin Hood inspires debate. Is he a symbol of rebellion, a revolutionary figure standing against tyranny? Or is he a champion of morality, a gentle thief who redistributes wealth to restore balance? Modern adaptations continue to wrestle with these questions, portraying him sometimes as a gritty outlaw and other times as a polished hero. And as long as those debates continue, Robin Hood remains alive, not in the records of history, but in the hearts of those who tell and retell his story. Perhaps that is the true essence of the mystery. Robin Hood's power lies not in whether he lived, but in how deeply he resonates. He is as real as the hopes and dreams of the people who kept his name alive for over 700 years. His existence may never be proven, but his presence has shaped culture, history, and imagination in ways far greater than any single man could achieve. And so, we are left standing at the crossroads of history and legend, staring into the shadow of England's most famous outlaw. From the first ballads whispered in taverns to the grand tales of Sherwood Forest, Robin Hood has slipped through the fingers of time, refusing to be pinned down by fact alone. Was he a real man who fought against the weight of corrupt authority, or was he born from the collective imagination of a people desperate for justice? The records hint at dozens of possible Robins, yeomen, rebels, fugitives, but none give us a clear face. Perhaps that is why the legend has endured so powerfully. Robin Hood is more than one man. He is an idea that has been reshaped for every generation. To the medieval peasant, he was hope that even the lowly could stand against sheriffs and kings. To Tudor England, he became a noble protector of the crown's order. To the Victorians, he was morality wrapped in romance. And to us, he remains a hero of justice, courage, and rebellion. His story has become a mirror, reflecting not just history, but the values and struggles of those who retell it. The outlaw of Sherwood Forest may forever remain hidden in the mist of the past, his true identity unknown, his life an unsolved puzzle. Yet perhaps that is the greatest power of his tale. Because without a single name or body to claim, Robin Hood belongs to everyone. He is the champion of the poor, the rebel against corruption, the dream of fairness in a world so often ruled by greed. And whether he lived or not, his story continues to live, echoing through ballads, books, films, and hearts across the world. Robin Hood endures because we still need him. As long as there are questions of justice, as long as power is abused, as long as stories are told to keep hope alive, the bow will remain strung, the arrows ready, and the legend of England's greatest mystery outlaw will never fade.